Part 1. The beginning of your astonishing, information-rich, and emotionally powerful historical story, Abraham Lincoln, The Shadow and the Light. A true historical epic. Prologue. The night of the eclipse. The night was unusually quiet in Washington. The air smelled of iron and rain, and the moon, half veiled by drifting clouds, hung above the Potomac like a fading lantern. Inside Ford's Theater, laughter echoed, music fluttered, and a weary man smiled for the first time in weeks. Abraham Lincoln, the 16th President of the United States, leaned slightly forward in his chair as the actors on stage performed Our American Cousin. His eyes, however, were distant, drawn to some place beyond the laughter, beyond the stage. Those close to him would later remember he seemed at peace, almost luminous. The Civil War, that long nightmare of smoke and brothers' blood, was finally over. The Union had survived. Freedom had triumphed. And yet, history would remember this night not for peace, but for the shot that echoed through America's soul. A man slipped silently behind the president's box, pistol in hand. The flash of a gunpowder spark cut the darkness. And so began not just the death of Abraham Lincoln, but the birth of the legend. Chapter 1. Born Under a Borrowed Roof. Long before the great speeches, before the tall hat and marble monuments, Abraham Lincoln was just a barefoot boy, born under a leaking roof in a Kentucky cabin. He came into the world on February 12, 1809, in a one-room log house at Sinking Spring Farm near Hodgenville. His father, Thomas Lincoln, was a frontier carpenter, honest, hard-working, but haunted by misfortune. His mother, Nancy Hanks Lincoln, was quiet and gentle, said to read her Bible aloud by the flicker of the hearth. They owned little, but they owned enough: courage, faith, and an unyielding will to survive. Abraham's early life was marked by poverty so deep it would have crushed weaker souls. The Lincolns moved often, chasing land, escaping debt, and outrunning sickness. By the time he was 9, Abraham had already seen death. His mother, Nancy, died of the mysterious milk sickness, a frontier plague caused by poisoned pastures. He helped build her coffin with his own small hands. That night, under a cold Kentucky sky, he watched as they buried her in the forest. Later he would say, "All that I am or ever hope to be, I owe to my angel mother." It was the first loss in a life that would be filled with them. Chapter 2. The Book and the Axe. Lincoln grew up in silence. His father could not read. His stepmother, Sarah Bush Johnston, encouraged him to. Books became his sanctuary, his escape, and eventually his weapon. Neighbors remembered seeing the tall, awkward boy walking miles just to borrow a book: the Bible, Aesop's Fables, Pilgrim's Progress, and a worn copy of The Life of Washington. He read by firelight, after long days of splitting rails and plowing fields. He once said, "My best friend is a man who'll get me a book I ain't read." It was during these silent nights that the seeds of greatness were sown. Lincoln was not born to wealth or privilege. He was forged in the frontier's loneliness, sharpened by labor, and lifted by words. By 17, he was 6'4", towering, strong, and solemn. Locals called him the Long Nine, both for his height and his uncanny strength with an axe. Yet behind his rough hands and broad shoulders was a mind already questioning the world. Why were some men masters and others slaves? Why did fairness always seem like the hardest road? He had no answers yet, but the questions never left him. Chapter 3. The River to Freedom. In 1828, young Lincoln took a job piloting a flatboat down the Mississippi River to New Orleans. The journey changed him forever. It was there, among the markets and ships, that he first saw the slave auctions, human beings chained, bought and sold like livestock. A young woman crying as her child was taken away. A man whipped until he bled, only to be sold again. For the rest of his life, he would carry that image like a wound. Years later in the White House, he would tell a visitor, "That sight was a torment to me." Freedom became his quiet obsession. But the world was still cruel to dreamers. When he returned home, he found his father sinking deeper into hardship. So Lincoln left, on foot, toward Illinois, a place that promised work and a future. He had no money, no education, and no clear plan, but he carried something rarer, a belief that character could outshine birth. Chapter 4. The Village Store Philosopher. New Salem, Illinois was just a dusty settlement of log cabins and muddy roads when Lincoln arrived in 1831. He took whatever work he could find, chopping wood, ferrying goods, running errands. Soon he found a job at Denton Offutt's store, where he became known for his honesty and storytelling. Locals gathered around the counter to hear Abe the storyteller, whose humor could silence the toughest men. When Offutt's business failed, Lincoln was left in debt, but not in despair. He borrowed law books from a friend, studied by candlelight, and began walking from house to house offering to help settle disputes. People began to trust him. When he ran for local office, his slogan was simple: "If you don't like my politics, at least like my honesty." He lost. But he didn't stop. He read more, studied harder. And when he finally entered the Illinois state legislature in 1834, he did so not as a polished politician, but as a self-taught man who could quote both Shakespeare and Scripture, who spoke for farmers, rail splitters, and laborers. It was the beginning of a journey that would end in the most powerful office on earth. Chapter 5. Love and Loss. History often remembers the public victories, but forgets the private heartbreaks. Lincoln fell in love with Anne Rutledge, a kind, intelligent woman from New Salem. She saw something in the awkward young man that few others did, a depth, a sadness, a soul hungry for meaning. They planned to marry, but fate intervened. In the summer of 1835, Anne caught typhoid fever. Lincoln sat by her bedside, helpless as her condition worsened. When she died, he was inconsolable. Friends feared for his sanity. For months he wandered the fields alone, whispering her name to the wind. "I can't bear to think of her in the cold ground," he said once. That grief, that shadow of loss, never left him. In later years, Mary Todd would become his wife, but Anne Rutledge would remain his ghost. Chapter 6. The Making of a Lawyer. By the 1840s, Lincoln had become one of Illinois' most respected lawyers. He traveled the 8th Judicial Circuit, riding horseback from town to town, arguing cases in makeshift courthouses. He defended the poor, the wronged, and sometimes even the guilty, because he believed every man deserved a voice. His courtroom style was simple but devastating. He never raised his voice. He told stories that disarmed the opposition, using humor to reveal truth. Judges admired him. Juries loved him. Once, when an opposing lawyer mocked Lincoln's rough clothes, Lincoln smiled and said, "My client is poor. I can't afford finer clothes, and he can't afford a finer lawyer." The courtroom erupted in laughter, and Lincoln won the case. But behind his easy smile, he carried a storm. He read about slavery spreading westward, about Congress divided by hate, about a country tearing itself apart. Something was coming, and Lincoln could feel it.